For millions of years, Earth was dominated by creatures so extreme that they seem impossible today. Among them all, there is a predator that defies almost everything we understand about biology, evolution, and the physical limits of animals. A Titanoboa. It wasn't just a big snake. She was a statistical error of nature. An animal so gigantic that its very existence changes what we know about the climate of ancient Earth, about the evolution of reptiles, and about how far life can go when the environment allows. And when scientists began studying this creature, they noticed something unsettling. Nothing about her was normal. Not even the size, not even the weight, not even the environment where he lived, not even the biological laws that made its existence possible. To understand why Titanoboa is so absurd, we need to go back in time, long before humans, before mammals dominated the planet, to a radically different world. A world where monsters were simply part of the natural balance. About 66 million years ago, a catastrophic event completely changed the history of life on Earth: the extinction of the dinosaurs. The impact of an asteroid devastated entire ecosystems. Forests disappeared, temperatures plummeted, and countless species became extinct. But after that initial destruction, something unexpected happened. The Earth began to warm up, and it got very hot. Without the large dinosaurs dominating the top of the food chain, gigantic ecological niches were left empty. This allowed new groups to evolve rapidly, including birds, mammals, and reptiles. Among these survivors were the snakes, and some of them started to grow far beyond the norm. Titanoboa lived approximately 60 million years ago, during the Paleocene period, in regions that are now part of South America. The environment back then was nothing like it is today. The rainforests were warmer, denser, and extremely humid. The average annual temperature reached about 30 to 34 degrees Celsius, significantly higher than any modern rainforest. And that's not an irrelevant detail. This is the key to understanding the sheer size of Titanoboa. Snakes are ectothermic animals, meaning they depend on the external temperature to regulate their metabolism. The warmer the environment, the larger the animal's body can be without compromising its biological functions. In other words, without an extremely hot planet, Titanoboa simply could not exist. Its size is, in fact, a living thermometer of Earth's ancient climate. By studying its fossils, scientists realized that the planet was much hotter than previously thought, a level of heat that would be considered extreme by modern standards. In other words, the mere fact that this snake existed has already rewritten part of the planet's climate history. For a long time, Titanoboa was completely unknown. Until, in the early 2000s, paleontologists found enormous fossilized vertebrae in a coal mine in Colombia. At first, they thought they were the remains of a large snake. But when they started measuring the bones, they realized something terrifying. The vertebrae were gigantic, larger than those of any known snake. The analyses indicated an animal with approximately 13 to 15 meters in length, weighing over a ton. A body as wide as that of an adult human. It was bigger than a bus. Larger than any current terrestrial predator. Larger than all known modern snakes. The discovery was studied by researchers affiliated with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, who confirmed that it is a completely new species, the largest snake ever recorded in history. Science had just discovered a true prehistoric monster. And this raised an inevitable question. How could an animal of that size survive? Titanoboa's size wasn't just impressive, it was a physical challenge. Very large animals face serious structural problems. The weight can crush the organs themselves. Blood circulation becomes more difficult. The movement requires a huge expenditure of energy. Body heat can be fatal. Even so, Titanoboa thrived. This suggests that his body possessed extremely efficient adaptations. Its skeleton was more robust than that of modern snakes, his musculature was absurdly powerful, his metabolism was perfectly adjusted to the extreme heat of the environment. And his way of life also helped. She was not a quick hunter. It was an ambush. Like modern anacondas, it spent most of its time in the water, where its enormous weight was partially supported. This reduced physical exertion and allowed a gigantic body to be functional. Water was essential for their survival. Outside of that context, its very size could be a problem. If its size is impressive, the strength of the Titanoboa is even more terrifying. Constrictor snakes kill by pressure, not by crushing bones, but by cutting off the prey's blood circulation. The pressure generated by modern snakes is already enormous. Now imagine a version weighing over a ton. Estimates indicate that Titanoboa could exert enough force to stop the blood flow of large animals in seconds. Without prolonged fighting. No chance of escape. The prey would simply pass out. This energy efficiency is important. Giant animals need to expend as little energy as possible to survive. And Titanoboa seemed perfectly optimized for that. In that ecosystem, few animals could pose a threat to it. She was at the top of the food chain. Giant fish, primitive crocodilians, and large aquatic vertebrates likely formed part of its diet. Evidence suggests it fed primarily on aquatic animals, reinforcing its dependence on rivers and swamps. This also explains another impressive feature. Its growth had few evolutionary limits. With no significant natural predators and an abundance of food, natural selection favored increasingly larger individuals. The result was one of the largest predators that ever existed in terrestrial or semi-aquatic environments. But if Titanoboa was so well adapted, why did it disappear? The answer lies, once again, in the weather. Over millions of years, the Earth began to gradually cool. Small temperature changes had a direct impact on giant ectothermic animals. Cooler environments mean slower metabolism. Slower metabolism means lower efficiency. And having a gigantic body ceases to be an advantage. Without the extreme heat necessary to sustain its physiology, Titanoboa lost evolutionary ground. The very characteristic that made it possible ended up contributing to its disappearance. Titanoboa was not just a large snake. She was the result of extremely specific conditions. Global climate much warmer. Newly rebuilt ecosystems after mass extinction. Abundance of food. Absence of major competitors. Favorable aquatic environment. Millions of years of unrestricted evolution. It's the perfect combination of unlikely factors. And that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. It represents an extreme natural experiment, an example of how far life can go when the limits of the environment are pushed to the maximum. And this leads to an even more intriguing question. If conditions were to become similar again, could such creatures emerge once more? There is a detail about Titanoboa that makes its existence even more disturbing from a scientific point of view. It was not just an enlarged version of modern snakes. Its extreme size completely transformed its biology, its behavior, and even the internal workings of its body. When an animal grows too large, it ceases to be merely big. It begins to obey different rules. And Titanoboa operated on a biological level that no longer exists today. To begin, think about time. The metabolism of a gigantic animal functions more slowly. Its movements are more calculated, its digestion is more time-consuming, and its feeding cycles follow a completely different rhythm than modern snakes. A common snake can take days to digest a large meal. Some species can go weeks without eating. But in the case of Titanoboa, we're talking about a completely different scale. Their digestive system likely took months to process a single large prey item. This meant that each attack needed to be extremely efficient. There was no room for error. Each meal was a huge energy investment. This type of strategy only works when the environment offers stability, constant warmth, and an abundance of resources. And that is exactly what the Paleocene world offered. the environment where she lived was a near-perfect system for sustaining giant creatures. Vast rivers, dense swamps, and extremely hot rainforests created ideal conditions for an ambush predator. Water, in particular, was essential. Besides supporting part of the body weight, it also helped with thermoregulation. An animal weighing more than a ton could easily overheat on land. Remaining submerged solved this problem and also offered a strategic advantage in hunting. This lifestyle suggests that Titanoboa likely behaved similarly to large modern anacondas, but on a much more extreme scale. It remained partially submerged, motionless, almost invisible. Waiting. And when he attacked, physics was on his side. Water slows down prey and amplifies the impact of a massive body's rapid movement. This means that, in an aquatic environment, Titanoboa was even more efficient than on land. But its real advantage wasn't just its size or strength. It was the way his body dealt with energy. Giant animals have a different surface area to volume ratio. This means they lose heat more slowly and maintain thermal stability for longer periods. On an extremely hot planet, this becomes a powerful evolutionary advantage. Titanoboa was, in a sense, a biological system optimized for storing heat. His own body functioned as a thermal reservoir. This allowed for long periods of inactivity, efficient digestion, and extreme energy conservation, fundamental characteristics for a giant ambush predator. Another somewhat unintuitive aspect involves its locomotion. Moving a body that is 15 meters long and weighs over a ton requires an absurdly efficient muscular structure. Each contraction needs to generate enough force to move an enormous mass. This suggests that Titanoboa possessed a much greater number of muscle fibers and a much more robust biomechanical arrangement than modern snakes. Its movement was probably slow, but extremely powerful. It wasn't a fast animal. It was inevitable. When moving through the water, its body could generate pressure waves that destabilized nearby prey. On land, its weight alone would be enough to intimidate virtually any other animal in the ecosystem. But size also brings a serious evolutionary problem: reproduction. Giant animals face enormous challenges in maintaining stable populations. They need large amounts of food, long growth periods, and balanced reproductive rates. In the case of snakes, the size of the mother directly influences the size of the eggs or offspring. This means that Titanoboa hatchlings were likely born relatively large, much larger than common snakes. Even so, growth to adult size should take years or even decades. This reveals something important. Titanoboa could only exist in an extremely stable environment for long geological periods. Any significant change in climate or food availability would rapidly affect its survival. And this helps explain why creatures like this are so rare in Earth's history. They depend on near-perfect conditions. There is yet another fascinating factor: the relationship between body size and available oxygen in the environment. Although the Paleocene did not have oxygen levels as high as earlier periods in Earth's history, the atmospheric and climatic conditions favored metabolisms different from those of today. Warm and humid environments directly influence gas exchange and metabolic efficiency. This may have contributed to allowing a reptile to reach such absurd proportions without collapsing physiologically. But perhaps the most surprising aspect is the impact that the discovery of Titanoboa has had on climate science itself. When the first fossils were analyzed, researchers realized that the size of the snake indicated average temperatures much higher than climate models predicted for that period. In other words, the animal forced scientists to reconsider estimates about Earth's past. The logic is simple. If modern snakes have size limits based on ambient temperature, then a much larger snake implies much higher temperatures. Titanoboa served as direct biological evidence of ancient climatic conditions. This transformed the snake into something more than just a prehistoric predator. It has become a climate indicator, a living record of the planet's conditions. The fossils found in what is now Colombia have revealed not just bones, but clues about an entire lost ecosystem. Giant tropical plants, ancient relatives of crocodiles, and enormous fish shared that environment. It was a world of extremes. And in extreme environments, evolution tends to produce extreme organisms. This pattern appears repeatedly in natural history. When there is an abundance of resources, an absence of predators, and favorable environmental conditions, body size can increase dramatically over generations. It is a phenomenon known as evolutionary gigantism. But Titanoboa took this principle to a level rarely seen among terrestrial vertebrates. And this raises another intriguing question: is there a maximum size limit for a snake? Physics imposes clear limitations. There comes a point where the body's own weight prevents the efficient functioning of organs, hinders blood circulation, and makes locomotion impractical. Many researchers believe that Titanoboa may have come close to this theoretical limit. In other words, she wasn't just big. She may have been almost the most a snake can be. This means that its existence represents a kind of biological frontier, an example of how far evolution can go before the laws of physics become an obstacle. And here an even more disturbing idea emerges. If Titanoboa lived close to the maximum possible limit for a snake, small environmental variations could determine its existence or extinction. A few degrees lower temperature could prevent its growth. Less food could limit its size. Ecological changes could reduce its advantage as a predator. Its gigantic size was a strength, but also a vulnerability. This delicate balance between advantage and vulnerability often appears in highly specialized organisms. The more adapted an organism is to a specific set of conditions, the more sensitive it becomes to change. And planet Earth is always changing. Another fascinating point involves its position in the food chain. Top predators exert enormous influence over their ecosystems. They control populations of other species, shape behaviors, and maintain environmental balance. Titanoboa likely played that role. Its mere presence altered the dynamics of the rivers and swamps. Animals that shared its habitat needed to adapt their behavior to avoid its attacks. This type of evolutionary pressure shapes entire ecosystems. In other words, Titanoboa was not merely part of the environment. She helped define the environment. And when it disappeared, the entire ecological system around it changed as well. This shows how evolution doesn't create organisms in isolation, it builds complex networks of interdependence. The existence of such an extreme predator implies an equally complex and abundant ecosystem. But there is still one question that intrigues researchers to this day. If Earth's climate was once warm enough to allow for the existence of a snake of that size, could something similar emerge again in the future? Theoretically, if suitable environmental conditions were to reappear, higher average temperatures, an abundance of tropical habitats, and prolonged ecological stability, evolution could once again favor giant reptiles. But there is a modern factor that completely changes this equation: the human presence. Today, large predators face constant pressure from habitat destruction, competition, and rapid environmental changes. The stability necessary for the emergence of creatures like Titanoboa would hardly exist long enough. This makes their story even more extraordinary. She is a product of a world that no longer exists. A world that is warmer, wilder, and governed by natural forces on an almost unimaginable scale. There is something even deeper in the story of Titanoboa than its size, its strength, or its role as the ultimate predator. What truly makes this creature extraordinary is what it reveals about the limits of life on Earth. It shows that nature does not have a fixed pattern. The limits we consider natural today, maximum size, maximum strength, ecological balance, are not permanent rules. They are merely a reflection of the planet's current conditions. Change the environment, and the very definition of what is possible changes along with it. Titanoboa is proof of that. For a long time, scientists believed that there were relatively stable biological constraints on the size of snakes. Modern snakes seem to indicate a clear limit. Even the largest living species rarely exceeds certain parameters of length and mass. Then Titanoboa fossils emerged and challenged that idea. She showed that biological boundaries are much more flexible than we imagined. They depend directly on the planet's temperature, atmospheric composition, food availability, ecological competition, and environmental stability over millions of years. This completely changes our understanding of evolution. Evolution does not move towards a specific goal. It responds to available conditions. When the environment allows for extremes, life explores those extremes. And in the Paleocene world, the environment encouraged gigantism. But Titanoboa isn't just important for understanding the past. It also helps scientists study the present and even predict the future. Today, researchers use information extracted from its fossils to understand how global climate influences the body size of ectothermic animals. The relationship between temperature and growth observed in Titanoboa serves as a model for investigating modern climate change and its impacts on current species. This happens because body size is directly linked to the functioning of ecosystems. Changes in global temperature can modify entire food chains, influence metabolic rates, and alter the geographic distribution of countless species. Titanoboa serves as an extreme example of these relationships. It depicts a scenario in which the planet reached heat levels capable of sustaining gigantic organisms. By studying this distant past, scientists can better understand what might happen when Earth's climate changes significantly. There is also a philosophical aspect to this discovery. The story of this giant serpent challenges our intuitive perception of the natural world. We tend to imagine nature as a balanced and predictable system, but geological history reveals something different, a planet in constant transformation, where periods of stability are interrupted by radical changes. Titanoboa existed because the planet went through a specific phase in its history, an extremely hot, abundant phase with no recent precedent. When that phase ended, she disappeared. This shows that the very definition of normal in nature is temporary. What seems impossible today was once commonplace. Another fascinating point involves the cultural and scientific impact that this discovery provoked. The idea of a snake the size of a bus captured the public imagination and rekindled interest in prehistoric creatures outside the world of dinosaurs. For decades, the large reptiles of the Mesozoic era dominated popular attention. But Titanoboa showed that even after the extinction of the dinosaurs, the planet continued to produce equally impressive creatures. She represents a lesser-known, but no less extraordinary, chapter in the story of life. Their study also contributed to advances in paleobiology, biomechanics, and climate modeling. In attempting to reconstruct how an animal of that size functioned, scientists needed to develop new methods to estimate body mass, muscle strength, metabolism, and behavior in extinct species. These techniques are now applied in various studies on evolution and ecology. The fossils of this giant snake have also helped researchers to more accurately reconstruct the ancient tropical environment where it lived. Detailed analyses have made it possible to estimate rainfall levels, vegetation density, average annual temperature, and species diversity from that period. This makes Titanoboa even more significant. She is not just an isolated organism in the fossil record. She is a window to an entire world that has ceased to exist. By observing their fossilized bones, scientists can visualize ancient rivers, dense forests, intense climatic cycles, and complex ecological relationships that shape that environment. Few fossils offer such a comprehensive view of how an entire ecosystem works. But perhaps the most intriguing question that arises from this story is a simple one. How far can life go? If a sufficiently warm and stable environment can produce a snake 15 meters long and weighing over a ton, what other extremes could evolution produce under different conditions? Natural history is full of examples of organisms that seem impossible at first glance. Giant insects of the past, colossal mammals, dominant reptiles, marine creatures of unimaginable proportions. Each of them emerged because the planet offered the right conditions. Titanoboa represents one of those rare moments where evolution has explored the ultimate limit of gigantism among snakes. And this reminds us that Earth is a dynamic system, capable of generating life forms far beyond what we see today. His disappearance, on the other hand, reinforces an equally important lesson. Even the most powerful organisms depend on environmental balance. Titanoboa dominated its ecosystem, but it couldn't survive the gradual climate changes that altered its habitat. Its gigantism, once an advantage, became a limitation as the planet cooled. This reveals a fundamental truth of evolution. It is not the strongest or the biggest who wins, but the one best adapted to the conditions of the moment. And conditions are always changing. Today, the only evidence of this extraordinary creature is preserved in museums and research centers, such as the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, where reconstructions of its size help the public visualize the magnitude of this animal. When observing these depictions, it becomes difficult not to feel a mixture of fascination and unease. The idea of a predator of this scale living in tropical forests reveals how different the planet once was. A world where the heat was more intense, the ecosystems more extreme, and the limits of life much broader. Titanoboa was not just a giant snake. She was the product of a different planet. A planet that operated under distinct climatic rules, where evolution explored possibilities that seem impossible today. And that's exactly why nothing about her was normal. Its size was not normal, his environment was not normal, his metabolism was not normal, its scientific impact was extraordinary. She represents one of the most extreme examples of the power of evolution when the environment allows life to surpass the limits we imagine. And perhaps the greatest lesson this creature leaves us with is simple and profound at the same time. Nature always holds possibilities that we do not yet fully understand. If you've made it this far, comment on which part of Titanoboa's story impressed you the most, its size, strength, extreme climate, or what it reveals about evolution. And if you enjoy exploring the planet's scientific mysteries, consider subscribing to follow new discoveries like this one. Thus ends the story of one of the most extraordinary creatures that ever existed, a predator that redefined the limits of what was possible and proved that, in Earth's history, the extraordinary was often just part of reality.